In the hush of the ancient world, long before the rise of empires, before the carving of stone tablets or the building of cities, there was only the wilderness, and those who tried to survive it. This was the Pleistocene epoch, a time dominated by ice, by beasts, and by struggle. Vast glaciers crept across the land. Herds of mammoths roamed the frozen plains. And among them walked the first humans, not as we know them, but as shadows of who we would become. They were the Homo habilis, the handy man. Not yet fully human, but no longer fully ape. They walked upright, their hands nimble and curious. They could shape simple tools, stones sharpened to points, bones stripped to poke and pry, but fire was still a dream, unknown, untamed. In one forested valley lived a small band of early humans, barely more than 20. They knew only what they saw, that berries filled their stomachs in the summer, and the cold cut through skin in winter like knives. They knew the scent of wolves, the crack of lightning, the thrill of a successful hunt. But what they did not know, what they feared most, was the dark. At night, the forest came alive. Eyes gleamed from the trees. Things howled, stalked, and snatched the careless. The people huddled together, using smoke from smoldering branches left behind by lightning as temporary shields, not yet knowing how to make fire their own. But change, as always, was coming. A young boy named Kalan, barely into his 7th winter, had a hunger beyond meat. He watched the storm clouds with awe, not fear. He saw how trees burned when the sky lit with fire. He did not flinch when thunder cracked. And in the story of fire, Kalan would become the spark. Kalan was different. While others focused on survival, gathering roots, shaping stones, or running from predators, Kalan watched. He observed how tree branches fell in windstorms and sparked against stones. He watched birds dance above fire-struck meadows, picking at roasted insects. He noticed that animals avoided the smoking stumps left by lightning. Where others saw danger, Kalan saw potential. One day, as the tribe scavenged along the base of the cliffs, a storm rolled in from the mountains. It was fast, violent. Thunder rolled across the sky like the growl of gods. Lightning struck an ancient pine, and the forest erupted in flame. Most of the tribe screamed and fled, except for Kalan. He stepped closer, cautiously, studying the fire's movements like a predator studies prey. The fire licked at the leaves, devouring them. It danced. It crackled. It breathed. Kalan reached out, too close, and the heat bit his skin. He recoiled, sucking his fingers, but he did not run. He crouched instead, watching until the flames died into embers. The others returned only when the smoke thinned, muttering in their primitive tongue about the forest spirits. But Kalan, he brought something back with him. A single, glowing coal wrapped in bark and moss. The others did not understand at first. They shrieked when they saw the ember. But Kalan blew on it gently, feeding it dried grass. Flames flickered to life in a nest of twigs. And for the first time in memory, fire was theirs, not as a gift from lightning, but as something born by their own hands. That night, they sat in a circle around the fire. For the first time, there was no darkness pressing in. No eyes gleamed from the woods. No growls. Just warmth. Light. Safety. And Kalan, the boy who watched the storms, became something else. A keeper of flame. A bringer of change. With the coming of fire, everything began to change. The tribe no longer huddled in caves at night, afraid of the unseen. Now they sat around the glowing flame, whispering in soft grunts and gestures, their faces lit orange in the flickering light. The warmth soothed tired limbs and scared off the predators who once stalked them with impunity. But fire did more than protect, it united. For the first time, there was a reason to gather after sunset. They began to share more than food. They shared sounds, gestures, expressions. Simple stories took form: the hunt that went wrong, the spirit of the river, the dream of the antlered beast. These tales grew bolder, more rhythmic, and with them, so too did their sense of identity. But fire was not only a gift. It was a responsibility, and a danger. One morning, after a windstorm swept the forest, a careless ember caught the dry grass near their shelters. Within minutes, flames surged around them. Panic took over. The youngest screamed. The old man, Burrow, tried to stamp it out with bare feet and collapsed. Kalan, still barely more than a child, leapt toward the river to fetch water, but it was too late. The shelters, crudely built from grass and branches, crumbled in smoke. When the fire died down, half of their camp was gone. The tribe mourned Burrow that night, not just for his wisdom but for what his death represented. That fire, though divine, demanded reverence. It was neither pet nor toy. It was a beast of its own kind. And Kalan, once celebrated as the fire bringer, was now seen with wary eyes. Some whispered that he had angered the sky gods. Others watched him sleep, fearful that he might summon another blaze. But Kalan understood something deeper: that change always burns. The season turned colder. The skies dimmed, and the days shortened. Wind howled across the valley with a sharper bite, and the rivers slowed into brittle sheets of ice. The fire, once a marvel, became essential to survival. Each night, they fed it, shielded it, guarded it like a newborn. But warmth alone could not fill empty bellies. Food grew scarce. The berry bushes had withered. The insects vanished. And the smaller animals, hares and birds, fled the coming frost. The tribe needed meat, real meat. And that meant hunting larger prey: bison, deer, maybe even mammoth. Kalan had never gone on such a hunt. He was still young, but fire had earned him a place among the older hunters. Grull, the broad-shouldered leader, allowed him to carry a sharpened spear made of bone and flint. The tip was crude but deadly. At dawn, they left the camp: Grull, Kalan, and two others: Nari, quick and lean as a cat, and Tob, thick-necked and silent. They followed hoofprints through the snow, down toward the open plains. There, under the pale sun, they found a small herd of reindeer grazing by a frozen stream. The plan was simple: flank, scare, isolate. Grull and Tob would charge from the front, Kalan and Nari from behind. It almost worked. The herd scattered in a blur of hooves and steam, but one young buck stumbled on a rock. Kalan saw his chance. He ran, faster than he ever had, heart pounding like a drum. He leapt and thrust the spear, striking just above the leg. The buck screamed and kicked. Blood sprayed hot across the snow. It took 3 more blows, but the animal finally stilled. When the others arrived, Grull placed a heavy hand on Kalan's shoulder. No words were spoken, but the meaning was clear: he was no longer a boy. They skinned and carved the buck right there, offering the heart to the fire when they returned, an old gesture, now renewed with deeper purpose. That night, with meat roasting and embers glowing, the tribe felt stronger than they had in many moons. And Kalan, no longer just the fire bringer, had become the hunter. Winter deepened. Snow covered the forest floor in thick, silent blankets, and the trees stood like frozen sentinels. The fire never went out now: someone always kept it alive. When the winds howled too hard and the embers waned, they fed it moss, bark, or the last scrap of dried wood. Fire had become not just warmth, but life itself. As the nights grew longer, something else stirred among the tribe: belief. It began subtly. Tob, the silent one, started placing stones around the fire in the shape of antlers. Nari, after a dream she claimed was sent by the sky eyes, began drawing figures in the dirt: beasts with many legs, people with burning hands. Grull offered bits of cooked meat to the flames before eating. Even Kalan, though unsure, felt a strange presence at times. Once, while walking alone near the stream where they'd hunted, he heard whispering in the wind, words not quite human, not quite wind either. He turned and saw nothing. Yet the feeling stayed with him. That night, an elder named Sima, the oldest in the tribe, nearly blind, her back curled like a question mark, spoke softly beside the fire. She had no words for gods or spirits, but she remembered things. She told them of ancestors who came from the east, across lands now buried under ice. She spoke of mountains that once breathed smoke, of a great bird that brought light. No one fully understood her. But in her voice was memory, and in her memory, meaning. They began to decorate their cave with ash and ochre, marking the walls with symbols, hands, animals, suns. Kalan painted the flame, over and over. It seemed to burn even on stone. Stories became rituals. Rituals became law. And fire, once a mere tool, became sacred. But the flames didn't just drive back the cold. They also cast shadows. And in those shadows, fear grew. For across the mountains, far beyond the river and the dead trees, others had seen the fire. Not all were friends. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds had vanished. A pale mist hung over the camp, thick as wool, and the air felt tense, like the earth was holding its breath. Kalan was the first to spot them. From the ridge to the east, figures emerged, for shapes, hunched and dark, walking upright but moving in strange, twitchy patterns. Their skin was gray with ash, their hair long and matted with ice. They wore furs stitched in unfamiliar ways and carried bone-tipped clubs instead of spears. One dragged a bundle wrapped in bark and twine. The tribe froze. Grull signaled everyone to crouch behind the fire pit, holding up a flat hand. The strangers stopped just across the clearing. For a long moment, no one moved. Then one of the outsiders stepped forward and grunted something unintelligible. It was not their language. It sounded like rocks scraping together, harsh, broken, urgent. The stranger pointed at the fire, then to his chest. Kalan, heart pounding, stood slowly. He stepped forward with open hands. The tribe watched, breathless. He gestured to the fire, then placed his hand over his heart, mirroring the stranger. A second passed. Then the ash-covered man dropped to one knee and placed a bundle of dried grass and bark on the ground. An offering. They had come not to steal, but to learn. Over the next hours, tension softened. Nari shared strips of dried meat. Sima approached and sniffed the strangers like a wary animal. The tribe spoke in gestures, drawing in the dirt, mimicking sounds. It was crude, but it worked. They learned these people had no fire. Their own attempts had failed, their sparks died in damp caves and frozen winds. Their numbers were few. They had come from far, following the rising smoke they'd seen days ago. Kalan built them a small flame. When it caught, the strangers cried out, not in fear, but in awe. They touched the flame's warmth like it was a spirit. That night, 2 tribes sat by a single fire. But not all in the group welcomed this unity. In the shadows, Tob muttered to himself. He watched the strangers closely, hand never far from his club. He did not believe in gifts from ash-covered men. For a while, there was peace. The 2 tribes shared knowledge in silence and symbols. The strangers taught new hunting tricks. How to trap birds with snares woven from sinew and how to find root vegetables buried deep beneath the frost. In return, Kalan showed them how to guard fire, how to build stone rings to contain it, how to use dry moss as kindling. They even painted together. In the main cave, a new mural stretched across the stone, two groups of figures, arms raised, a flame between them. Handprints overlapped in red and black ochre. Children from both tribes played together, throwing bones like dice and chasing one another through the snow. But under the surface, tension simmered. Tob remained hostile. He insisted the newcomers had brought sickness. Two tribe members had developed fevers since their arrival. He claimed that the strangers had spirits clinging to them, vengeful and cold. Others began to nod in agreement, swayed not by reason, but by fear. Then, a disaster struck. A hunting party went missing, 3 men and a woman from the original tribe. They had gone north toward the stone hills to track deer. Days passed. No sign. When Grull and Kalan finally followed their trail, they found only blood in the snow and a broken spear. Next to it was something stranger, a necklace made of carved bone, unfamiliar in shape and material. Not their own. When they returned to camp, Tob saw the necklace and spat. "Them," he growled, pointing at the strangers. Arguments erupted. Sima tried to calm them with stories of long winters and how madness could bloom like mold in darkness. But her words were old and soft. Tob's voice was loud and sharp. That night, a fire was built not for warmth, but for judgment. The tribe gathered around it. The strangers were brought forward, confused and frightened. Grull stood between the sides, torn between his duty to protect and the dread now curling through the group. Kalan stepped forward and held the bone necklace up for all to see. And then he said, for the first time aloud, "This is not ours." The fire crackled. The cold wind blew. But no one knew what he meant yet. Kalan's voice hung in the air like smoke. The fire popped and hissed, but no one spoke. All eyes were on the carved bone in his hand, smooth, polished, too intricate to be made by either tribe. Grull stepped forward, taking the necklace. He turned it slowly, inspecting the markings etched into the surface. Lines. Crosses. Small shapes like teeth or claws. Symbols none of them recognized. "It is not theirs," Kalan said again, gesturing to the ash-covered strangers, who now stood trembling in the firelight. "Nor ours." Tob bared his teeth. "Then whose?" he growled. "Spirits don't leave bones." Sima spoke then, voice weak but steady. "There are others. Always more beyond the trees. The world is wide." The idea was unsettling. To think that beyond their valley, beyond the frozen rivers and wooded ridges, more tribes wandered. Tribes who carved bones with unknown symbols. Tribes who might not want fire. Who might not trade. Who might take. Kalan did not sleep that night. He sat by the fire, feeding it bark, watching the shadows writhe along the cave walls. The bone necklace lay beside him. He traced the carvings with his finger, wondering what they meant. A warning? A signature? A prayer? By morning, the strangers were gone. They left no trace, no footprints in the snow, no bundles, no farewells. Just the dark outline of where they had slept. Grull said nothing. Nari wept. Tob said only, "They knew we would see the truth." The cave felt colder after that. The tribe pulled closer to one another, spoke in hushed tones. Kalan found himself isolated again, firelight flickering across his face as he considered what they had witnessed. He no longer felt like a boy, or even a hunter. He was something else now, something between a seer and a scout. A watcher of signs. He took the bone and tied it to a strip of leather, wearing it beneath his furs. It reminded him that the world beyond the fire was not empty. It was waiting. Winter's grip tightened. The cold sank into bone, and the forest grew quieter with each passing day. Even the wolves had moved south. The tribe rationed meat and chewed bark soaked in snowmelt. The fire burned constantly now, its crackle was the heartbeat of their survival. Without it, they would not last. Kalan spent more time alone, walking the ridges and valleys near the camp. He had become the tribe's eyes, scouting the edges of the known world. It was on one of these walks that he saw something that did not belong. Tracks. Not deer. Not elk. Not bear. Human. But not theirs. The footprints were wider, deeper. The stride was long, confident, and there were many. At least 6 sets, all walking west. Not toward them, away. Kalan crouched, tracing the prints with gloved fingers. He followed them for hours, moving low along the tree line, until he reached a hill overlooking a dry riverbed. Down below, broken branches, bones, and blackened earth marked a recent camp. Smoke had stained the rocks. Stones had been arranged in strange formations, circles inside circles, with crude carvings of animals in the center. But no people. He approached the site carefully, the wind stinging his cheeks. What disturbed him most wasn't the fire pit, nor the bone tools, it was what had been left behind, a pile of burned fur and 3 smashed skulls. Human skulls. Cracked and shattered. Ritual or rage? He didn't know. But he felt it, the same unease as when he first held the carved bone. He returned to the tribe at dusk, his furs stiff with frost, face pale. Grull listened, expression hard. Sima murmured prayers. Tob demanded they move camp, leave the valley, head south. But Grull refused. "This is our fire," he said. "They will not take it." But in the dark, even Grull tightened his grip on his spear. And Kalan, lying awake beneath a sky thick with stars, wondered if fire had not only lit the world, but made them visible to those who watched from the dark. Nights grew longer. The moon, when it rose, was sharp and pale as bone. The fire still roared in the center of the camp, fed constantly by tired hands, but around it, silence reigned. The usual laughter, the story grunts, the rhythmic tapping of bone flutes, all were gone. Even the children were quiet. They had begun to feel watched. It started with small things. A hunter's trail disturbed. A bone carving missing from the cave wall. A rabbit carcass, half-eaten, placed at the edge of their clearing, skinned, but not by any of their blades. Then, one night, the dogs began to growl. The tribe stirred. Kalan rose first, spear in hand. He peered into the darkness beyond the firelight and saw them, eyes. At least 6 pairs, glinting from the tree line. Low, unblinking. They did not move. Did not blink. Just watched. Grull stood beside him, muttering a wordless curse. The others joined, gripping weapons, clutching one another. The flames danced high, casting long shadows behind them. And then the eyes vanished. No footsteps. No growls. Just gone. In the morning, they found footprints in the snow, circling the camp. Dozens. Not animals. Not familiar. A mix of bare feet and hides, dragging sticks or spears. At the eastern edge of the clearing, a single bone was planted upright in the snow, another carved token, etched with the same symbols as the one Kalan wore around his neck. This was not a warning. It was a message, "We see you." Grull wanted to strike back, to send warriors east to follow the trail, but Sima stopped him. "To chase shadows," she said, "is to become one." Instead, they began to fortify the camp. Stones were piled high at the cave's mouth. Spears were sharpened twice. Firewood was stockpiled in huge heaps, even at the cost of exhausting the hunters. And Kalan, now considered part of the tribe's inner circle, was chosen to lead the night watch. Each dusk, he sat by the fire, clutching his spear, eyes fixed on the woods. He did not know what hunted them. But he knew it would return. Snow fell for 3 days straight. Thick, heavy flakes muted the world, burying paths, blurring the trees, swallowing sound. The camp seemed frozen in time. Even the fire crackled quietly, as if afraid to break the silence. Kalan barely slept. Each night, he took his place at the cave's entrance, listening, watching. On the third night, something changed. It began as a vibration. Not a sound, at